Harley Davidson was America's roar. Now it's a whisper. Sales are crashing. Riders are leaving. Dealerships are dying. So what killed the king of motorcycles? A political war, a broken promise, and one decision that changed everything. This is the fall of Harley Davidson. What's happening? It was more than a motorcycle brand. It was a myth in motion. For over 100 years, Harley Davidson was the roaring pulse of American rebellion, a chromed-out, rumbling symbol of freedom, masculinity, and national pride. Its very name conjured the image of open roads, leather jackets, and a country that refused to be tamed. For decades, Harley didn't just represent motorcycles, it represented the United States itself. During the Great Depression, Harley survived while others folded. During World War II, they produced over 90,000 military bikes for U.S. troops, embedding themselves in the DNA of victory. By the time the baby boomers came of age, the Harley wasn't just a vehicle, it was a rite of passage, a badge of honor, a lifestyle. In the 1960s and 1970s, Hollywood made Harley immortal. From Easy Rider to Marlon Brando's outlaw image, the brand cemented itself in pop culture. Its heavy, low-riding cruisers became synonymous with defiance and grit. Through ups and downs, Harley always stood tall, resistant to trends, unwilling to apologize. Loyal riders didn't buy Harleys because they were practical. They bought them because they believed in what they represented. By the early 2000s, Harley Davidson had become a global powerhouse. Even as Japanese competitors outperformed them on specs, even as younger consumers leaned toward sportier bikes, Harley maintained its myth through sheer identity power. They weren't just selling motorcycles, they were selling the American dream on two wheels. And then without realizing it, they put all of it at risk. The problem wasn't just one decision, it was a slow erosion of trust. But there was a single moment, a turning point, when Harley went from admired to accused, from cultural institution to corporate traitor. It didn't happen in the factory. It happened in Washington, and it all started with a trade war. That moment came when steel met politics, and Harley got caught in the crossfire. What happens next makes everything worse. But before we go there, hit subscribe so you don't miss what other companies are hiding too. The Tariff Trap. President Donald Trump initiated a sweeping tariff campaign against foreign imports. Among the most aggressive moves was a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum, two materials central to Harley Davidson's manufacturing process. The stated goal: protect American industry. The unintended consequence? Harley's production costs skyrocketed. The impact was immediate. Harley relied on raw materials sourced globally, and the sudden price hikes threw their financial models into chaos. The company estimated the tariffs would cost them up to $100 million annually. For a brand already struggling to maintain sales momentum, this was a devastating blow. But the pain didn't stop at home. In retaliation, the European Union imposed its own 25% tariff on American motorcycles. For Harley Davidson, which made nearly 40% of its sales overseas, this was catastrophic. A single bike shipped to Europe suddenly cost thousands more in duties alone, pricing it out of competitiveness almost overnight. Now Harley faced a brutal decision. Either they absorb the costs and bleed capital, or shift production for international bikes to overseas factories and try to stay alive. From a business standpoint, the choice was clear. Harley announced it would move some production for EU-bound bikes out of the United States, not to save money, but to avoid tariffs and survive. To Harley's board, it was strategy. To Donald Trump, it was treason. The announcement triggered outrage from the White House. Trump took to Twitter almost instantly, accusing Harley of using tariffs as an excuse and warning them that their decision would come at a steep price. For Trump, this wasn't about economics. It was about optics. An iconic American brand was, in his words, turning its back on the country. In the days that followed, the internet erupted. Loyal Harley owners felt betrayed. News outlets framed it as a culture war. Riders who had trusted the brand for decades began questioning their allegiance. Harley thought they had done the right thing for survival. Instead, they ignited a firestorm. And it only took one tweet to make it worse, because now Harley wasn't just a company, it was a target. Trump's revenge. Harley Davidson should never be built in another country. Never, Trump tweeted. And with that, the dam broke. Social media erupted. Conservative influencers rallied their followers. Boycotts started trending, and in towns across America, the unthinkable happened. Riders parked their Harleys. For good. For decades, Harley Davidson had been seen as untouchable. It was draped in the flag, backed by history, and reinforced by the loyalty of millions. But now, with the president himself leading the charge, that trust collapsed. It didn't matter if Harley's decision was driven by tariffs. The perception was betrayal. Dealers began reporting walkouts. Customers who had planned to buy canceled their deposits. Riders who had Harley tattoos, who had spent years customizing their bikes, were now selling them in protest. It wasn't just economic damage, it was cultural exile. To make matters worse, Harley's leadership couldn't control the narrative. CEO Matt Levatich issued a statement clarifying that U.S. production would remain intact and that only international-bound bikes would be made elsewhere. But the backlash drowned it out. The message had already been set in stone. Harley had betrayed America. Trump, sensing political momentum, didn't stop. He continued hammering the company in speeches, interviews, and rallies. At one point, he warned that if Harley moved jobs overseas, it would be the beginning of the end. And for once, his words rang with chilling accuracy. And from that point forward, Harley's collapse was no longer theoretical. It was in motion. The CEO's nightmare. Inside Harley Davidson's glass-paneled headquarters in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the mood had shifted from tension to dread. Matt Levatich, a CEO who once spoke of legacy with pride, now sat in a storm of collapsing numbers, mutinous dealers, and hostile headlines. The crisis wasn't abstract anymore. It was measurable. In vanishing revenue, in dealership closures, and in the empty parking lots where customers used to gather every weekend to talk chrome, thunder, and freedom. At first, they thought it was a bump. The fallout from President Donald Trump's tweet would pass. So would the tariff panic, but the metrics kept bleeding. Quarter after quarter, sales dropped. In the United States, the company's spiritual homeland, Harley Davidson's share was shrinking faster than analysts could revise their forecasts. Investors started whispering, then they started walking. Inside the boardroom, emergency meetings stretched into late nights. Marketing was in damage control. Public relations issued clarifying statements. Levatich gave interviews. He stressed Harley's commitment to American manufacturing, emphasizing that bikes for the U.S. market were still built in America. But none of it worked. The narrative had already metastasized. Harley wasn't just offshoring, Harley had betrayed its country. And Levatich was the man who let it happen. His nightmare deepened as Harley's competitors pounced. Indian Motorcycles, owned by Polaris, launched an aggressive campaign targeting Harley's disillusioned base. Import brands like Yamaha and Honda took advantage of the silence, pushing budget-friendly alternatives. Meanwhile, social media roasted Harley Davidson daily. Memes, angry videos, comment threads stacked with the word traitor. The company had lost the cultural war. In Milwaukee, longtime employees stared at spreadsheets with numbers they didn't recognize. The stock price had fallen to its lowest point in over a decade. Layoffs were quietly discussed, and yet through the chaos, Levatich remained publicly calm. Privately, however, he knew the brand's mythology had shattered. Harley was no longer the rebel. It was the establishment, and in a time of populist outrage, that was a death sentence. Then came the plan. If Harley couldn't rebuild its reputation through press releases or apologies, maybe it could buy it back. That meant one thing: go big on image, go louder, more patriotic, more American than ever before. A full-scale rebranding campaign was green-lit. But this move wasn't just risky, it was desperate. So they tried to buy their way back into America's heart, the brand that lost its meaning. Harley Davidson didn't just build motorcycles, it built mythology. For over a century, the name stood for freedom, rebellion, and raw, unapologetic power. But when that mythology was threatened, Harley made a fateful decision. It tried to buy back its soul. After the tariff backlash, the Trump feud, and the electric misfires, Harley's leadership believed the problem wasn't the bikes, it was the messaging. So they launched a massive rebranding campaign. Flags waved in slow motion. Gravel-voiced narrators spoke of honor and tradition. 4th of July fireworks boomed behind chrome-plated cruisers. It was Harley at full volume, selling the dream it had always stood for. But something was off. The campaign didn't inspire, it rang hollow. The more Harley leaned on patriotism, nostalgia, and legacy, the more it sounded like it was begging to be believed. And the public noticed. Critics called it tone-deaf. Social media mocked it relentlessly. One viral post summed it up: "You can't slap a flag on a betrayal and call it redemption." The centerpiece of the campaign, a limited edition Made in America bike drenched in red, white, and blue, was supposed to win back trust. Instead, it alienated even more people. Loyal riders felt manipulated. New riders felt nothing. The campaign didn't close the wound, it reopened it. Behind the scenes, Harley's identity crisis deepened. Focus groups were held. Brand consultants were brought in. Executives tried everything. Veteran tributes, small-town Americana montages, even collaborations with streetwear brands. None of it worked. The magic was gone. Because Harley's problem wasn't just marketing, it was meaning. The sound of a V-twin engine, once sacred, had been replaced by silence. The grit and danger that defined Harley had been replaced with polish and corporate gloss. What was once a counterculture icon now felt like a relic wearing a leather jacket it didn't earn. Younger riders didn't care. Older riders didn't recognize it. And in trying to appeal to both, Harley ended up connecting with neither. This was the real collapse, not just in sales, but in spirit. Harley Davidson, once a living symbol of American grit, had become a brand without a message, a logo without a cause. And as the company pushed harder to restore what it had lost, the more obvious the truth became. Harley Davidson didn't just lose its edge, it lost its meaning. And then came the gamble that would alienate the last of their loyalists: the electric collapse. The Livewire was supposed to be Harley's future, a sleek, fully electric motorcycle. Fast, quiet, high-tech, it was engineered to attract a younger urban demographic. Riders who didn't care about tradition but wanted sustainability, acceleration, and smartphone connectivity. For the board, it was a necessary pivot. For the market, it was a betrayal. Hardcore riders saw the Livewire as a joke. No rumble, no vibration, no soul. The sound of a Harley, once its most sacred signature, was gone. In its place, a soft whine like a blender, internet forums lit up with rage. "This isn't a Harley," one comment read, "it's a laptop on wheels." The price made things worse, nearly $30,000. More than a base Tesla, more than most motorcycles. And for what? No heritage, no soundtrack, and none of the rebellious mystique Harley was known for. Dealers struggled to sell it. Many refused additional units. Customers came in curious but left indifferent, or worse, angry. The bike wasn't just unpopular, it was seen as evidence that Harley had fully lost touch with its base. And then the sales numbers came in. Abysmal. Livewire flopped so hard that Harley spun it off as a separate brand, hoping to contain the damage. But the narrative was already locked in. Harley Davidson had tried to evolve and alienated nearly everyone in the process. Younger riders didn't care. Older riders walked away. And investors, they bailed. Tech media mocked it. Motorcycle press called it the most tone-deaf launch in decades. Harley's gamble had detonated in its face. And now even the dealers were losing faith. The dealer rebellion. They were supposed to be the last line of defense, the hometown heroes who kept the Harley flame alive. But after years of shrinking margins, unsold inventory, and a brand identity crisis spiraling out of control, even Harley Davidson's most loyal dealers began to give up. It started quietly. Whispers at regional conferences, grumbles in Facebook groups. Then came the refusals. Requests for large shipments were met with silence or outright no's. Summer floor plans sat empty. And behind the scenes, a growing number of dealerships began diversifying their showrooms, making space for Indian, Honda, Triumph, even electric startups. Where there were once rows of blacked-out cruisers, there were now adventure bikes and scooters built for a new generation. For many dealers, this wasn't betrayal, it was survival. The financial math no longer worked. Harley's aging lineup wasn't moving. The floor planning costs, insurance overhead, mandatory upgrades, and rigid sales quotas became anchors dragging them under. Some pivoted to pre-owned bikes, others quietly rebranded, removing Harley signage altogether. Several long-running dealerships, some operating for over 30 years, shut down completely. But economics weren't the only reason. There was something deeper, a sense of emotional and cultural disconnection. These dealers had built communities, hosted rallies, sponsored local events. They had watched their towns grow around the Harley name, but now they felt abandoned, caught between a confused corporate strategy and a base that no longer trusted the brand. The Harley they had built their lives around was gone. One former dealer put it bluntly in an anonymous interview, "I didn't leave Harley, Harley left me." In response, Harley's corporate office scrambled to patch the cracks. Incentives were offered, loyalty programs expanded, internal memos urged aggressive re-engagement, but it was too late. The trust was broken and the cracks had turned into a full-blown fracture. This wasn't a protest. It wasn't a boycott. It was a slow, quiet exodus. The kind that happens when faith runs out. And without its dealers, Harley wasn't just losing distribution. It was losing its final human connection to the communities that once gave it life. As Harley's network crumbled from within, the rest of the motorcycle world wasn't just watching. They were taking over. The foreign invasion. While Harley Davidson stumbled through cultural backlash and collapsing loyalty, its competitors went on the offensive. And they weren't just taking shots, they were winning the war. Indian motorcycles, owned by Polaris, seized the moment. Their machines didn't just rival Harley's, they outclassed them. Better performance, bolder styling, smarter marketing. Indian leaned into Americana without the baggage. They became everything Harley once was, authentic, loud, and fearless. Their ads didn't apologize, their bikes didn't disappoint, and riders noticed. Meanwhile, the Japanese brands, Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, kept doing what they'd done for decades. Build quality bikes that worked. No politics, no posturing, just reliable machines with modern tech, better fuel economy, and half the price tag. While Harley spent millions chasing electric dreams and rebranding campaigns, these brands quietly took the entry-level and mid-tier markets Harley had abandoned. And then came the Europeans, BMW, Ducati, Triumph, brands that once existed in separate categories now lured away high-end riders who craved engineering excellence and innovation. They weren't bound by nostalgia. They were building the future. Everywhere Harley looked, the walls were closing in. In showrooms across America, riders who once wore bar and shield tattoos were trading them in for sleek cafe racers, nimble sport tourers, and stripped-down cruisers with better tech, lower costs, and none of the baggage. Harley had once been untouchable. Now it was just another brand on the floor, more expensive, more complicated, and increasingly irrelevant. The truth was brutal. While Harley clung to legacy, its rivals captured reality. And the longer it looked backward, the more ground it lost moving forward. Faced with collapsing loyalty at home and ruthless competition abroad, Harley made its boldest move yet, a leap into the future that would end in disaster. The quarter that broke them. It was supposed to be just another quarterly report, dry, corporate, and forgettable. But what Harley Davidson revealed that morning was anything but routine. As analysts dialed in and investors watched from Wall Street to Milwaukee, the numbers began to roll out. And they did not just disappoint, they detonated. Sales in the American market had collapsed by over 30% compared to the previous year. International revenue had flatlined. Dealer inventories were swelling with unsold units, and factory output had already been slashed to half capacity. Margins eroded beyond repair. Net income had dropped by more than 50% year over year, and most damning of all, Harley Davidson was now projecting a multi-year decline, signaling that this wasn't a dip, it was a descent. The call sent shockwaves through the investor community. Hedge funds that once bragged about Harley as a legacy hold dumped shares within hours. Small-time investors watched the ticker bleed red. Confidence wasn't just shaken, it was shattered. And inside Harley Davidson's own boardroom, reality set in. The company was no longer battling short-term volatility. It was in structural free fall. What rattled investors most wasn't the numbers alone, it was what the numbers revealed. Harley Davidson wasn't failing because of one bad product or one bad year. It was failing because its business model had grown brittle and outdated. It relied on a rapidly aging demographic, an increasingly unaffordable product lineup, and a dealership network cracking under political and cultural pressure. Every layer of Harley's empire was eroding at once. CEO Jochen Zeitz tried to contain the panic. He emphasized ongoing restructuring efforts, teased future models, and promised international growth. But the damage was done. No spin could cover the fact that Harley Davidson's greatest enemy was no longer foreign competition or shifting taste. It was time itself. The world had moved forward. Harley had not. The market didn't respond with anger. It responded with silence. That's what happens when hope dies in a spreadsheet, and in the factories, the people who built the brand felt it most. The workers left behind. As the outrage burned in political headlines and consumer forums, something quieter and sadder was happening on the ground. The layoffs began, slowly at first, then in waves. Assembly lines in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania went quiet. Workers who had spent decades building tanks, welding frames, tuning engines, they were called into conference rooms, handed severance checks, and sent home. For many, Harley Davidson wasn't just a job. It was an identity passed down across generations. It was what put food on the table, what built pride in their town, what made them feel like they were part of something bigger than themselves. Now they were watching it all dissolve. Local economies felt the shock. Diner waitresses, hardware stores, auto shops, they all relied on Harley traffic. Without it, entire communities dimmed. The loss wasn't just economic, it was emotional. Because for every worker who punched out for the last time, there was a feeling that something sacred had ended. Executives tried to cushion the blow. They promised retraining programs, temporary shutdowns, reallocations to other facilities. But the truth was clear. Harley Davidson was shrinking. And the workers, those who had stayed loyal through the political firestorms, through the brand missteps, through the cultural disconnect, they were left behind. But in the silence of those shuttered plants and empty break rooms, one question echoed louder than the rest. The board had one last shot, but could they stomach what it would take? The restructuring gamble. When the floor fell out from under Harley Davidson, there was only one option left: reinvention. In a last-ditch effort to salvage what remained of the crumbling empire, Harley replaced its CEO, overhauled its leadership structure, and announced a sweeping corporate reboot. The message was clear. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new Harley Davidson. But even as press releases and carefully polished interviews rolled out across the media, the question loomed large: was anyone still listening? The new CEO came with Silicon Valley credentials, global market expertise, and the kind of polished detachment that played well in investor meetings but landed cold in dealer showrooms. The board hoped this change would signal bold thinking and innovation, but for lifelong riders and Harley employees, it felt more like a surrender. The company doubled down on its electric ambitions. LiveWire, previously spun off into a separate brand, was now positioned as Harley's spearhead into the future. Simultaneously, a new range of mid-weight and entry-level bikes was announced. Smaller, lighter, more affordable. It was a play to win younger riders, urban commuters, and global buyers. The announcement came wrapped in the language of modern branding: experience, freedom, evolution. Yet underneath the buzzwords, the core message was unspoken but obvious. We're not who we used to be. Dealerships received the updates with cautious optimism. A few welcomed the changes. Many more were skeptical. They had heard promises before. Flashy new models didn't mean much when foot traffic was still vanishing and riders weren't walking through the door. Worse, Harley's aggressive restructuring also meant tightening up the dealer network, increasing pressure on sales quotas, and rethinking allocation models. Some dealers were given new bikes to push, others were quietly removed from the future altogether. Internally, Harley reorganized its marketing and product development teams, hoping to cut cost and increase speed. Entire departments were merged, streamlined, or eliminated. Employees described it as a corporate earthquake, one that left scars and no small amount of bitterness. The strategy was ambitious. On paper, it made sense. Diversify the product line, go global, capture a new generation of riders. But Harley wasn't just a motorcycle company, it was a cultural symbol. And symbols don't pivot easily. As the new Harley rolled forward, the company watched its old self disappear in the rearview mirror. The problem? The road ahead was already crowded with brands that had been born in this new world. Agile, affordable, and built for modern values. And worst of all, while Harley chased the youth market, it started losing something even more dangerous, its legacy riders. Harley tried to stem the bleeding, special incentives, floor plan forgiveness, dealer loyalty programs, but it was too late. The base was gone, and now all that remained was a logo and a legacy on life support. The end of an American icon? Harley Davidson was never just any of those things. It was a promise, a belief, a myth stitched into the very idea of America. But myths are fragile. They need belief to survive, and somewhere along the way that belief was broken. The numbers are sobering. U.S. sales have fallen to their lowest point in 2 decades. Dealerships are closing every month. The stock, once a Wall Street darling, has become a warning sign. And while overseas sales limp along, the core market that built Harley Davidson, Middle America, has moved on. Some point fingers at the electric pivot, others blame globalization, Trump's tariffs, or management missteps. But the truth is simpler. Harley stopped being what people needed it to be. In the age of corporate betrayal, environmental reckoning, and consumer empowerment, Harley clung too tightly to the past and reached too clumsily into the future. The result? A brand without a home. But here's the real tragedy. The bikes still matter. The roar still matters. The feeling of carving through a desert road with nothing but wind and engine, it still moves people. But people no longer associate that feeling with Harley, because in the end, loyalty cuts both ways. Harley Davidson didn't just lose its riders, it left them behind. So was this betrayal, or was it the moment America left Harley behind? So what do you think? Was this Harley's betrayal, or did America leave Harley behind? Drop your take in the comments. We read them all. And if you want more no-spin breakdowns on motorcycles, money, and the machines that shape this country, like, comment, and subscribe.